Hi everyone, Heather here with Astrology with Heather.com, and I am back again with my good friend Robert Phoenix. Hi Robert.
Hey Heather, it's good to be back with you again. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. And I'm sorry again for being late. So we're doing this a little bit after the new moon this month because I keep having scheduling issues, and it's completely on my end, not Robert's fault. But we're going to be getting into a little bit more this month because of it, because we're going to be talking about some of the crazy astrology this week and into the full moon. And then we're going to get into eclipse season because that's coming up fast. And it's kind of the energy's being triggered this week. So I feel like it's pretty timely.
Yeah, I think so too. And shaping up to be very powerful eclipse cycle, starting with the solar, the lunar, and of course, that's the lead into the big eclipse action in December, on the 26th of December, where I think a lot of stuff culminates and triggers and sends us off into a whole nother vector in 2020. So this is it now. We're starting to get into the tunnel. We're starting to get into the vortex. And it's a good time to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you want to just kind of jump in?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, you and I are talking, and it's the Libra moon. And we're going to be talking about what's going on in this week with the Scorpio moon. We're going to look at that kite pattern, that trine. Mm-hmm. And right now the moon is squaring Cancer, right? So it's squaring the sun, and it's squaring the true nose. So what's really interesting is, I tend to follow sports a lot, and there's a lot of astrological kind of real-time stuff that happens in sports. Mm-hmm. And there's a guy by the name of Kevin Durant who plays for the Golden State Warriors. And Kevin happens to be a Libra. And he's been out for about a month. He tweaked his calf when he was playing against the Houston Rockets. So he's been out a month. There's been a lot of pressure on Kevin to come back and play because they're down 3-1 to the Toronto Raptors. It's the NBA Finals. Now, Kevin Durant is poised, or was poised, to become one of the richest athletes in the world. Okay? He was getting ready to go out into free agency, and a player of that caliber rarely reaches the open waters of free agency. And his manager used to be hooked into Jay-Z and Rockefeller, and he's a very aggressive guy. He's gotten a lot of deals done for him with Silicon Valley. And the idea was to get him to the New York Knicks. And I think the play ultimately was for him and his partner, his business manager, to eventually become part owners of the Knicks. So this is, they're broaching new territory. Athletes becoming owners, becoming moguls. This is a whole new game, right? So he decides he's going to come back and play last night. And what happens? Last night, he tears his Achilles, which for a basketball player is almost the equivalent of a death sentence, okay? Mm-hmm. So he's not going to play for an entire year. So what's really interesting is that, of course, being the Libra moon, it's not quite conjunct Durant's sun, but squaring off against all these Cancerian planets. Mm. The big debate now in the NBA and sports is around self-care, right? Like he didn't take care, he was more invested in maybe the outcome, or maybe even more invested in, what the team wanted him to do, or more invested in public opinion. And so when you look at that square, it's also squaring off against the South Node. And so we get into this whole thing around, the true node being Capricornian and hierarchical. That's ownership. What's really interesting, too, from a sports perspective, is that NBA teams now are starting to do away with the word owner because they think that it's insulting to their players and their teams, right? Yeah. Which, you can chime in on that on a couple of different levels. For some people, actually, like if you ask Michael Jordan, who's the owner of the Charlotte Hornets, you think he wants to drop owner from his name of the franchise? Hell no. And there are people who work hard to get these franchises, and there's an idea of pride, right? Like, this is something I built, I put together. Yeah, I deserve to be an owner around this. But now there's this whole kind of woke ideology where the NBA is really kind of it's the 50-yard line for woke ideology. And now these owners are saying, well, we don't want to have owner as part of our name because this is insulting to our players. So this is a lot of the South Node stuff coming in right now from ownership, Capricorn, and then the players are starting to gain a little more power in the NBA. But this debate now with Kevin Durant is interesting because the guy that he's been playing against, the guy by the name of Kawhi Leonard. And Kawhi's a Cancer. And he's a total Cancer. He's moody. He doesn't really talk. He keeps to himself. He has, unfortunately, the cliched reputation of a Cancer in that, let's just say, he's tight with his money. Okay? Mm-hmm. So Kawhi has had an amazing year. And, of course, the true node is in his sign in Cancer. And what's really fascinating is he created a logo because he's got big hands, right? This guy's got like large hands. So he created a symbol for his hands, a logo, and it's called the claw, okay? And he's a Cancer, right? And so what do we associate with the crab? The claw. Now, what's really interesting is that he's suing Nike. And he's suing Nike because they kind of appropriated his claw image that he came up with. And if you look at Nike, what's their symbol? It's the swoosh, which is Saturn, mm-hmm. right? So here we have an astrological kind of duel between Kawhi Leonard, Cancer, the true node, the claw, Nike, Saturn, the South node. It's just all getting played out. So Kawhi sat out a whole year because he thought that his injury would prevent him from, excelling and getting to the marketplace. So now the debate is, well, this is what Kawhi did, and Kevin didn't do this. And we're having this clash right now in the media as we speak. Like, did he make the right choice? Did Golden State force him? Did the media force him? They're looking around for people to blame. Mm-hmm. They're trying to point the finger. Who really screwed Kevin Durant over with his desire to play last night and tearing his Achilles. And it gets into that moon square to those nodes, to Saturn, to Pluto. So the volume in the mainstream sports world right now is around 10 on this thing. So it's just fascinating to watch. And today I tuned into Facebook, and there's this gal, and her name is Angela Jean, and she's interesting. She does like a website work. She's very active on Facebook. Anyway, she did a Facebook Live, and she was basically crying on Facebook Live today. And her piece was that she was going back in time, which is a very Cancerian trait. Mm-hmm. And she was looking at where she felt like she was participating in her own traumatization. And what she was essentially saying was like, I experienced all this trauma in my life, and now I'm having this realization that on some level, I was part of it. Like, I made choices, and I did things that kind of undermined who I was and undermined my potential. And it was interesting to watch because she was also getting into this. This is two themes that came up today, was bullying. And so she said, well, I was bullied for being different, right? And Jalen Rose, who's a player, ex-player, said that the media was bullying Kevin Durant. So it's a common theme here today, right at the start of the week, with this the moon in Libra squaring off against the Cancerian stuff and squaring off against the Capricornian stuff. Now we're going to move forward in time, and we're going to check out the moon in Scorpio, where these energies can come back together and are actually more copacetic in terms of transforming some of this emotional crisis that I think is really very close to the surface right now.
Absolutely. And I mean, I feel like that's going to be, that story that you just told is probably pretty relatable for a lot of people. especially people who have a lot of Cancer energy in their charts, because I've seen a lot of my close friends who have really strong Cancer in their charts, they're having a lot of difficulty. And under this Libra moon in particular, a lot of them have been reaching out. And so, you know, there's a lot of people going through an emotional crisis. There is this energy of wanting to push forward with something and having a lot of fear from the past, right? That's Pluto and Saturn being a part of it. And something that you brought up kind of at the beginning of that discussion was this idea of self-care with the players. And I think that that's definitely something that we need to incorporate more now so than ever with all of the astrology that's going on. So again, something relatable more on a personal level too. I think that this is a time where we really need to look at if we're pushing too hard, you know, and if we're taking things too seriously, and maybe taking a step back and taking care of ourselves as need be as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the lessons of the true note in Cancer.
Yeah.
Is that people really have to invest in self-care in a way that sets themselves up for,
Hi, Jasper.
he takes care of himself. Sets themselves up for kind of longer term cycles and habits that are meaningful and helpful. So it's a good time to do it. It's a really, really good time to do it, because, you know, we got to nurture ourselves, and because we can't take care of other people. And this is one of the things that's also been a theme where, you know, that came up in some of these discussions around Durant, you know, like people don't reach out to you when you're down, but they come to your funeral. You know, they'll cry crocodile tears or tell you what a great person. And I've heard this before. The first person that I really heard this from was Freeman, who happens to be a Cancer. And he basically said, you know, I've done all this work for all these people, and, you know, there was nobody there for me. There was nobody to heal the healer. And while I sympathize with that, that's also on each and every one of us.
Yeah.
You know, we can't demand that people be there for us.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's unreasonable. And I think we have to be there for ourselves, and anything over and above that is gravy.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And that kind of falls into that realm of Saturn and Capricorn, and taking responsibility for yourself and your own actions, and kind of what that woman that you were talking about was so upset about, like realizing that she played a role in all of these things and that she's responsible for herself. And it's not just everybody else doing things to you or for you. You know, it's you're playing a role in all of this, regardless of, you know, circumstance.
Right. And I think that's one of the most fundamental dialogues that we all have to have with ourselves. How do we sell ourselves out? How do we sabotage? You know, what kind of relationships we set up that keep us from, you know, really reaching our potential? What do we settle for? You know, where are the source of our fears emanating from? I think these are all really, really important questions that we have to ask ourselves, because unless we can stare them down and resolve them, we're going to repeat things over and over and over again. And now we're into Groundhog Day. You know, this whole Cancer Capricorn axis is a really interesting one, because with Cancer, we're looking back into the past. We're trying to really reach back into our roots, and, you know, where we grew up and how we grew up and what the conditions were. And Capricorn is quite different. Capricorn can go backwards and forwards, right? But it's really looking out to the rest of the solar system.
Yeah.
So we're not only looking backwards to try to reassemble parts of who we are, but we're doing them so we can move forward and chart a path into the future. And that's kind of an intense path, because we have to go through Saturn, we have to go through Pluto, and we have to go through the unknowingness of the South Node. And those South Nodal institutions, man, they are just, in terms of Capricorn, they're just not dependable these days. In fact, they're really shaky, to be honest.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's, again, us taking, that shows a greater need for us to take responsibility for ourselves, and even like a more practical way, right? Because we can't rely on the state or the government or these corporations or these authority figures in our lives, even like the church and things like that. Like everything seems to be unraveling in a way where it's like you can't depend on anyone nowadays except for yourself and your, you know, immediate friends and family and that sort of realm. So that's that Cancer, right? That's like North Node in Cancer.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah.
I agree. So it's a super interesting time, and these eclipses are going to highlight that energy intensely.
Yeah.
And there are social issues where this is all about self-care. He's like, I'm going to take care of my
He's just
whiskey.
going to put his butt right in the camera.
My cat butt. Yeah. So the central issues, the core issues around the eclipse energy is going to be motherhood, birth, abortion, and boundaries, borders, right? Like, for instance, just south of here yesterday, 350 Central Africans just got plopped down into a bus station in San Antonio. Now, it was easy to track them because if you were paying attention, they were shown crossing the Rio Grande, right? They were shown going through. So how do 350 Central Africans get to Mexico to cross the border? I mean, this is really a big question. And then they just get dropped, right? Because they've got no place to put them. They just get dropped at a Greyhound station in San Antonio. And now the city of San Antonio is scrambling to find French translators. And, there's one area in Maine, I think it was Portland, Maine, where they've got a ton of people from Central Africa who've gone, and they called Maine and say, hey, can we send them up there? You guys have the infrastructure, to do that. I said, no, we're booked solid. We don't have any room. So, again, this is kind of we're verging on a crisis.
Yeah.
And the crisis is, at the risk of sounding alarmist and xenophobic. I mean, these are people who have not been vetted. They have not been screened. We don't understand what their physical condition is. We don't understand what kinds of viruses they're bringing into the country, and there's already been a couple of people who are from Texas who got on a plane and went to Fiji and they've died of Ebola, right? So, and I'm not saying that everybody that comes into the country has Ebola, but there's no standardization. There's no kind of filtering. They're just getting picked up and they're just dropped into the center of a city. To me, that's the South Node in Capricorn, right? That's the failure of a government to take responsibility for something that is approaching a crisis level. And it's like now we're putting all that burden on a city. Now, there are groups that are bringing, I hate to be political here for a moment, but it's important. There are groups of people that are they're flying the people from Central Africa into South America, and they're eventually making their way to Mexico. Now, if they want these people to be a part of this experience, then they should follow through and then provide for them every step of the way, right? That they should provide for their housing, they should provide for their medical scanning and screening. Like, take responsibility for it. If this is really the kind of, zeitgeist that you believe in, and that you really feel like these people have such a raw deal in Central Africa that they just have to come here, then follow through with it. Don't just drop them off like some abandoned kittens, on a doorstep and expect somebody else to take care of them. And at some point, that nodal shift, that Cancerian shift, people are going to start to get upset about it. And because it's ultimately not their problem. This gets back into the whole self-care thing. And it's going to be very interesting to see how this is played out. And this is really that South Node and the failure of the government to get really involved and to make sure that they're not just the processes that have been theoretically set up, but clear processes where it's people that have either priorities or there's something that needs to be sorted out in a way that's not being taken care of. It's unfair for the people of San Antonio. It's unfair for any city to all of a sudden have to deal with people showing up on their doorstep and then pony up for, everything that they're going to need. And especially while Americans are homeless in the streets of this country, and they're the last on the list. They're not getting any help at all. There's your true node in Cancer. There's the wake-up call. Walk through the streets of Portland. Walk through the streets of Seattle. Walk through LA. Walk through San Francisco. they've literally become third world countries. And this is the crisis that I think that these eclipses are going to bring up. It's going to be very significant. And at some point, people are going to say, we've had enough. And it won't be pretty. I'm telling you right now, it won't be pretty. This gets back to what they're doing now on YouTube. And we can talk about that with deplatforming and YouTube just, laying waste to channels. And one of the things that YouTube is using as part of their talking points around content that gets very close to what they deem to be unacceptable to the community guidelines is criticizing things like immigration. Like, you can't do that anymore on YouTube. And this is really a bad step for the country and the Western world. If we can't have a healthy debate and talk about issues, then we're in real trouble. And we're in more trouble than just 350 Central Africans showing up in San Antonio who can't even speak English, okay? That's a much bigger issue at play.
No, and that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, and these discussions are necessary to have. And I don't think what you said comes across as xenophobic or anything like that. It's more about like human dignity and compassion and like, hey, how are we going to take care of these people that are just being like left here, like you said, like dropped off like a box of kittens or something, like that need to be taken care of in some way. We have no structures in place. The government is not going to take responsibility for these people. The government isn't even helping our own people who are literally making encampments in the major cities and like living on the streets. Especially, I've heard horrible things about what's going on in LA, and a lot of diseases coming back around because there's so much human excrement everywhere. And so like, if we have these issues here and the government's not even taking care of that, they're not going to, we shouldn't be relying on the government for these things anyway. No. But there's nobody to take care of extra people. And I have no issue with people coming from other countries, like escaping oppressive circumstances or difficult, difficulties in whatever their environment is and coming to a better place. But there needs to be some sort of structure put into place to help integrate these people and to, like you said, vet them and make sure that they're healthy and all these other things too. I'm sure that most of them are, but you never know. So I completely agree with you on that. And talking about this even is one of those things where we could get marked on YouTube as, being hate speech or something like that just by having this discussion. And so how are we going to fix the problem if we're not allowed to have the discussion?
That's the biggest issue. That's even bigger than, the pack of kittens that's been dropped at the Greyhound station. That's the bigger issue here. And for me, I think what we really have to look at is intent, right? I think intent is really important in terms of the big picture, also in our own lives. Like what's our intent? What's our intention? That gets back into that kind of self-examination process. So what is the intent of taking people from a place that is, impoverished or, being raped and plundered for rare earth minerals or whatever, right? And then just dropping them off. Is the intent there benevolent? I don't think so. I don't think it's benevolent. I think it's traumatic, because what you're doing is you're introducing those people to a new level of trauma. It's like you're just here, right? Go across this river, get over here, get dropped at this bus station. Mm-hmm. If there was true benevolence behind it, they would be guides and stewards. They would take care of those people. Those people would be incredibly important to their process, but they're not. And it feels like they're being used. And that to me this is my take on it. They're being used. And this is where these people are getting politicized, and unfortunately they're being weaponized. And this gets into the Jupiter square Neptune, right? Mm-hmm. Jupiter square, we get into Jupiter and Sagittarius. What are we talking about? We're talking about other countries, and it doesn't matter whether it's this country or whether it's Europe or any country. Jupiter and Sagittarius, it applies to your country, okay? Mm-hmm. And in this country, what we're dealing with that Neptune square is the blurring of the borders, the blurring of the intent, the blurring of benevolence. Mm-hmm. So we're in a really fuzzy, hazy period of time, okay? I think that there's the potential for a serious backlash. And we won't experience that backlash until Jupiter comes into Capricorn. And when that does happen, Jupiter is not going to be so benevolent. right? And we're going to be dealing with much more hardcore, more hardcore kinds of issues, more hardcore types of what's what I'm looking for, rules, regulations. There's going to be a lot less empathy in the water when Jupiter goes into Capricorn. So, you know, I think it's important for us to be able to have the discussion. And it's also important to get to the bottom of who's behind it and what the intention is. Mm-hmm. Because we can't make really credible decisions unless we really know that, right? It's important. And I think it's hard to get to right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And that Jupiter, and I'm going to share the screen so we can start looking at the charts here so people can maybe see a little bit about what we're talking about. But that Jupiter-Neptune square does make things really confusing too. So it's kind of like the lines are blurred and the information that's coming across is very confusing and very just murky. And we don't really know for sure what's going on and who to trust and who's right. And then there's all this nonsense about fake news and like taking things down from the internet. So it's like this just jumble mess of like what is really going on here, because it's very hard to be discerning right now with this Jupiter-Neptune square, I feel like.
So what's really interesting too, if you go back a couple of days, I would have put the sun right around 20 yeah. Gemini. And I think that's when they showed up at the Greyhound station in San Antonio.
That's like an exact opposition. That actually was a couple of days ago. That was actually yesterday was when the Jupiter Sun opposition came exact.
Okay, so they came in the day before yesterday, or close to it, right?
So that's like when
it's interesting. This is where astrology, to me, is always kind of a mind blower.
Yeah.
What is a bus station? A bus station is a Gemini portal.
It is. Wow.
Gemini. It's local, right? More than likely, it's local. Sometimes it goes out, but it is a portal of Gemini. And what do we have here? We've got Jupiter in Sagittarius, foreign country, right? Showing up at a freaking bus station. And then now we've got Neptune as part of that T-square. And it's like a big what the fuck moment. Mm-hmm. It's like, what the fuck? What's going on here? What just happened? How did they get here? And it's right there. It's right in that T-square.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I wonder what San Antonio's chart is like and how this configures with that.
Well, what's really interesting about San Antonio is that Saturday they had an election. They held an election for mayor on Saturday, and they basically voted their mayor, who tends to be on the left and progressive side, back in. So just 2 days after this guy gets reelected, these people show up. And I'm not saying that that's why he got reelected or that's how they got there. Yeah. But clearly there is a much more user-friendly type of leadership, lowercase l, that would be involved in this process. And, you know, let's open our arms. So, yeah, I don't know what San Antonio's chart is like. We could probably look it up, but yeah, it's a crazy moment, and there it is, right? Yeah. So what's interesting is this kite pattern, which is in kind of stark contrast to that T-square.
Yeah.
So when you look at all that water, right? Water operates in a different way than air does. You know, air is analytical, it's objective, it's deductive, right? So when you look at this, you look at the water. How does all this water strike you in the midst of this kind of air, water, mutable fire crisis?
Well, I mean, in my personal, I guess, interpretation of it is that there's a lot going on right now that's really confusing, right? So we just talked about that. It's hard to be discerning and figure out what exactly is happening. And in our own lives, to me, this Mars conjunction to the North Node is sort of representative of us wanting to move forward in a new direction and feeling very intensely, almost obsessed with it and wanting to move quickly because Mercury is there too. Saturn and Pluto on the opposite end is holding us back. There's a lot of hardship, difficulty, challenge. We have to wait and take our time and do things right and work through the old issues and let those go first before we can fully jump in. But there's a lot of fear and uncertainty and confusion going on right now, I think, with all this water, because water obviously represents a few different things. It's our subjective reality, it's intuition, it's emotion, right? It's looking at things through that lens. So if we rely more on how things feel and utilize that energy, our intuitive capabilities to navigate what's going on here, I think that is where the discernment comes in. It's not going to come in this rational, logical fashion. Mercury with Mars is like, I need to figure this out and I need to figure it out now. And there's a lot of emotion behind it in the side of Cancer, which can sort of distort our ability to interpret things on that analytical level. So I think relying on that right now is going to cause people to kind of jump the gun or to make just weird decisions that might not have the outcome that we think that they will. But if you take a step back and you put yourself in that more intuitive space, and especially with Neptune there, right? Neptune is like visions and impressions and connecting with the ethereal energies. If you kind of get into that little bit of a woo-woo space, I think that's actually going to help provide more guidance than trying to figure things out on that logical, rational level.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good summation in terms of the subjectivity, the energy. I mean, I just feel like people need to trust their gut.
Yeah.
You know, just trust your gut. And sometimes Cancer can get really insular and kind of tribal. But, you know, I think that at this time, the energies really support that. And I feel like it's important to be engaged with your intuition, your gut, your inner knowing. And I think we could get hung up a little bit right now with a little bit too much objectification in some ways. And I feel like if you want to move on something, you know, run it through, you know, your process. Does it connect with your head, your heart, and your gut all together? But I think ultimately, if you want to move on something with this moon in Scorpio over the next couple of days, it's a good time to move on something.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a good time to, you know, push some chips into the table. And look, I think by and large humans are a caring group, even though it feels like the conditions of our times are modifying that to some extent. But I think ultimately we're caring. I don't think we have to worry about not being caring or compassionate or empathic. I think what we have to really, really wrap our heads around is the fact that in many cases we've sacrificed our self-care for the care and the betterment of others.
Mm-hmm.
And not really realizing, getting back to that conversation around Kevin Durant, not really realizing the ramifications around it. So I think this is an important time for people to wrap their heads around it and to dare to go into areas where it's like, I need to protect my space. Mm-hmm. I need to protect my town. I need to protect my neighborhood, whatever that means, you know? And I think it's important. It's very important. And we have a government that says, don't do that. You know, we have a government that says, you know, we'll take care of things. And they've shown us again and again and again that they're far from capable. You know, look, I'm not a big wall person. I know you're not a big wall person. But there was a group that went up and they put together 1.5 miles of wall, right? And I'm not like advocating that, but that's like Trudeau and Cancer stuff. Mm-hmm. You know, they went out, they bought the materials, they got the money, they did their little GoFundMe, and boom, they put it up. Meanwhile, the government is dithering around. And to me, it's not going to get better.
Yeah.
And take the wall equation out of it. Just look around where you live and see how you can make where you're living a better place.
Yeah.
That's where the energy's at.
Absolutely. And this is an energy where you could do that in a way that is a little bit more compassionate than maybe like building a wall and blocking out the people you don't like. Although that's a good example, right? With that Saturn energy and that Cancer energy kind of.
Yeah, I mean, they just went for it. There was a kid that raised $22,000 selling, what was it? Ice cream sundaes or something like that. Root beer floats. Kid made $22,000. And he donated it to this wall fund.
That's crazy.
Right?
Yeah.
But I think what's happened to people in this part of the world is that we've become so dependent upon the government to assist mm-hmm. us that when it comes time to actually doing something for ourselves, it's like people are looked at like freaks in some ways. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's crazy.
I think this is a perfect energy to kind of look at like what's going on in your community and how can you help, right? That's like compassionate Neptunian energy coming into play. Like what can you do in your own immediate environment? And what can you take action on that somebody else is not going to necessarily do for you? Where is there a need and how can you fill it? And that is something that in our society, especially here in the United States, I don't know necessarily about other countries through firsthand experience, but we just expect the government to do things for us. And the government is not held accountable for the way that they utilize our resources. They tell us that they're going to fix our roads and we pay more taxes, right? They don't fix our roads. Nobody's held accountable for that. But if we take it into our own hands and we raise money at a grassroots level for something within our community and we don't do it, you better believe that the community is going to come after you. And if you're doing that for a charity organization, you could get prosecuted and you're actually held accountable for your actions. So I think there's a certain level of accountability that comes with doing things for your own community and doing things on your own and taking that responsibility. That's just not there with the government. I think that's part of the problem.
I think it's a huge part of the problem. You know, I was at a city council meeting a couple of weeks ago because here in Fredericksburg, we're working on the cessation of fluoridation in our water.
That's awesome.
So we actually got it on the ballot here on the 11th, on the 5th of November, 11/5. People get to vote on whether or not we get to keep fluoride in our water in this town, right? Okay. So we got involved in the process. Mm-hmm. We got enough signatures, and now it's basically us versus the dentists. And come November, people get to have a choice because we're being medicated without our informed consent around this whole thing, right? So we were I was at the city council meeting a couple of weeks ago, and there's a young guy who's a part of our group, and he's great young guy and really helpful. And the city council looked directly at him, and they said, we need more young people to show up here because we need more people to get involved. Because they know that they're on the clock. These are all people that are late 50s, early 60s. They're on the clock. And they need young leadership to be a part of this process. And they were looking straight at this young guy. And I feel like this is a perfect time for young people to get involved and to be a part of these smaller communities where you can really make a difference. Like they've been trying to get the fluoride out of the water in Austin for decades.
That's like never going to happen. It's too big. Like it's hard to do on that level. It's It's a giant monstrosity of a city at this point. How are you going to do that?
But here in this town with a little less than 10,000 people, you can make a difference. And I feel like this Cancerian energy, which is going to be with us up through the end of the year, is a really good time for people to understand this and to look at their lives, young people, to look and say, where do I want to be?
Yeah.
Where do I want to live? What kind of life do I want to have? What kind of people do I want to hang out with? Like you've even done that, right? You've gone on that journey.
And I'm not the only one. Something that I predicted before this even came that I was like talking about, I don't even know how long ago, with the energy coming in Cancer with the eclipses, is that a lot of people are going to be leaving the cities and coming into like smaller towns and wanting to sort of divest from that energy of being in the city. And something that's really surprising to me is the amount of young people like my age and, often younger, that are moving into the small towns. And where I live right now, there's a huge influx of millennials and people like in my age group that are very creative. They're entrepreneurs. They're like have their own businesses. They're doing all these things. And we're all working together, creating like really great community here. I just moved here and this is already happening because they came here for this, right? We all came here for this.
Right.
And there are other towns that are the same. You don't have to be in this specific town to make that happen. So, and it's so much easier to make that happen when you're doing it on a smaller scale because it doesn't feel so overwhelming and the government is so encroaching. And you can do that, right? But it's crazy how many young people are coming in, and the old people, some of them are angry about it, right? They're like, they're changing our ways and things like that. And that's where we get with the face off between the boomers and the millennials. It's just, it's always a thing.
Pluto's in square, right? I mean, Yeah. Well, that's, it's where the action is.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the action is not in the cities.
Mm-mm.
The cities are platforms of entrainment and zombification.
Yeah. And you can find community and make differences in a city. It's just going to be on a smaller scale, and it's not going to be as impactful as, as it could be in an area where you have less people to deal with and you have less of that encroaching, overarching, authoritarianism going on.
Yeah. I think really what we're talking about here is the seed pods for a new culture.
Yeah.
And I think what we're looking at, right, just with that South Node in Capricorn and Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn, we're seeing the death rattles of a culture, right?
Yeah.
We're seeing the end game of sort of this capitalist lead from the front unipolar power that the United States and the West has become. And we're watching it right now before our very eyes.
Mm-hmm.
We're watching it begin to kind of implode in some ways. This has been going on for a while now, but I think it's really evident. And so when we see all this Cancerian energy, this is the time where we can begin to plant the seeds for a new culture, which will sprout, obviously somewhere down the line. But I think it's important, 15, 20 years out, if you're still in Colorado, I have no doubt that you guys will be on the vanguard of creating something new, something very different from what we're experiencing at this point. It's going to be very interesting. So if you have any inclination to get out there and do it, I would say this is a really good time to do it.
And you know what? The way things are going right now with the corporations and the government really becoming more oppressive and encroaching, and the way that things have been going with social media and censoring people, that just shows that what we're doing at a grassroots level and through our connections with people via the internet is working. Because they wouldn't be so scared, they wouldn't be vying for control, they wouldn't be having to really, buckle down and double down on the rules and regulations and restrictions if there wasn't a reason for it. If we were all just doing what we were told and being good little sheep. If we were doing that, then they wouldn't be censoring YouTube, they wouldn't be censoring Facebook. So it shows that what we're doing is working. So my best advice for everyone is not to let that discourage you from speaking your mind and from connecting with people around these, and especially on grassroots levels, because if the other areas of the outlets for doing this via the internet, connecting with people on a broader scale, if that's being suppressed, you have to look to your immediate environment and finding people who have a similar mindset and who really want to put in the work and lay the foundations and seeds for something new. Because those people exist. They exist everywhere.
Yeah. We're over the target. We're over the target, which is why there's so much pushback and backlash on the social media side, because these controllers, the big pharma, big agri, big data. I mean, they're they want to control the game, and they're realizing that people don't really want to be controlled. Now, they could come up with a different scenario, which is kind of more nationalistic, and say, okay, we'll give them, their faux version of nationalism, but we'll still control them at the same time, right? That's another scenario that could happen. What we're proposing is something very, very different, or at least I am, which is much more local, much more organic, and people really defining kind of, how they want to live in a very different sort of way. When we look at the precession of the nodes, the next stop for that true node is going to be in Gemini, right? That's going to happen at the beginning of 2020. And that is really going to hone in on that local area. Gemini represents the world around you, right? So right now, people are kind of circling their feelings and their intuition and getting in touch with their gut, just like you did, say, hey, we're out of here. We're going to go move to Colorado. And then this next kind of iteration or incarnation of this nodal cycle is about local. What's going on in your neighborhood? What's going on in your town? And it's going to be very interesting because, again, it's going to be that South Node in Sagittarius, which is other countries. the importation
Mm-hmm.
groups and people. It's going to be very interesting to watch over the next few years.
And I wonder if it's almost going to be because it's necessary. Because first off, the bigger structures are starting to crumble and become dismantled. And I do think that we're going to see a breaking apart of the government as we know it over the next, 7-8 years, really. But like, even beyond that, there's all these different changes going on with the weather patterns. Are we in global warming? Is it a grand solar minimum? Is it just climate? Whatever's going on, there's something going on here. Everybody in every area that I visited and lived in and spoke to has had unusual weather patterns for the past several years. So it might become more necessary even to look to local sources, because maybe transportation is not going to be what it is right now. Maybe there'll be widespread famine in some areas, or maybe crops will not grow the way that we're used to them growing in the areas where we're used to them growing. It might almost be a requirement that we're looking more to our community as opposed to getting everything from everywhere else.
Yeah, I think we're going to see that in the fall.
Yeah.
Because of the massive amount of flooding that took place in the Midwest, and all the cattle that it wiped out, and also the crops. You say, well, those are crops that are harvested by big agri. It doesn't really matter. They still feed people, right? For better or worse, people are getting fed by those crops.
Yeah.
You may not eat them. I may not eat them, but other people do eat them. So I think we're going to start to see some of that really hit our shelves in the fall, which means that food prices are going to rise. Everybody should be growing a garden. Everybody, if you have space, you should be growing food. That's a given.
And it's interesting too, because last time Uranus was in Taurus, and we talked about this a long time ago, we had the Dust Bowl. And so people had to actually change their agricultural practices to make them more sustainable because of the climate change that happened during that period of time. And now we're having widespread flooding and really intense cold snaps in the spring that's killing off crops, and just weird stuff going on, fires everywhere. And so that's going to impact the way that we grow food. And I think it's going to be more you have to do it more in your immediate environment, and you have to rely more on yourself and your community. So it makes perfect sense with Uranus being in Taurus, that would be another thing coming up.
Yeah, a friend of mine lives down in North Carolina, and she has a goat farm just down the road from where she lives.
Mm-hmm.
And she sent me a link to this. Apparently they've got some kind of local competition for the best farm, best idea. I don't know what the prize is, but there are all these different videos that these farmers in this area of North Carolina sent in. You get to vote on them. And this one that she sent me, it's a family farm. The guy who started it along with his father had a degree in French literature, and he didn't know anything about goats or anything about farms.
Mm-hmm.
And his father knew a little bit about building some stuff, but they basically went in and bought this land and are teaching themselves how to farm, right? And it's we need more farmers.
Yeah.
It's in this. And the thing, when I had Zeus on my show,
that was a good talk.
Yeah, no, one of the things that he brought up, which to me was just the third eye just really opened. He talked about sex roles, gender roles on a farm,
mm-hmm.
and how everybody's equal, everybody's doing something.
Yeah.
Nobody's sitting at home, waiting for somebody to come home after 10 hours of work, right? Of isolation and alienation. The suburbs really throttled our model.
Yeah.
They totally throttled our model. And of course women are going to feel alienated and isolated,
mm-hmm.
because there was no cohesion. There was no sense of really participating and contributing to this thing that people were doing together. That's it was kind of a role of subjugation that was brought on by suburbs and commutes. We need more farmers. We need to figure out a way to bring that more back into our lives.
Mm-hmm.
So that our sex relations just naturally become more equal as a result of this stuff.
Absolutely.
And men and women can find their way together. So, we're doing a lot of preaching here on this Cancerian tip, but I think it's important. I really think it's important.
Well, and the whole point of these talks is to help people navigate what's going on a more broader scale, right? And that's what's going on. That's what time it is. It's time to start, taking responsibility and doing things more locally. Growing food is definitely a Cancerian thing, right? Nurturing animals, nurturing the land, nurturing your family, nurturing your immediate environment. That's Cancer, right? And
Yep.
it's interesting too. This is just kind of a side note, but Matt's really into farming, right? Like that's something he's always wanted to be a farmer, even though he's a nurse. He has no experience in farming. And so we came here, we already have this beautiful garden growing, and it is like we both have to put in work in it, right? It's not like one person is doing everything. Yeah. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. And then the other thing too is that he's going to be renting some land so he can grow his own crops, because we're looking at where there's holes in the market here in terms of like what people are growing and, what's going on in the local markets. And, he's going to start his own little farm on our friend's land. So, this is stuff that everybody can really do pretty cheaply, even in your own backyard, or if you have just like a tiny little bit of space. And yeah, anyway, I don't know where I was going with that. It's just...
Well, I think you were just being kind of a witness to the evolution of your relationship.
Yeah, it does make it more equal. He's doing a lot of like work outside and with the yard and all of that, and I have my certain roles and the things that I'm good at, and we do it together, and it's equal. It's not
right.
Like one person is doing the man's work, and
Right, and I think it's a great thing for our connection between men and women, and we've lost it. And suburbanization, I think, was a real killer for that.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, let's shift to the full moon.
Okay.
So we have the full moon coming up in the sign of Sagittarius. It's a lot of the same energy because it's just a few days after. But I just kind of wanted to point this out, and maybe there's, something you want to talk about here with the fact that this is highlighting that Jupiter-Neptune square, because we have the moon in it's a wide conjunction, but it's still in a conjunction with Jupiter, squaring off to Neptune. It's literally happening the day after the Jupiter-Neptune square comes exact, and the moon is in the sign of Sagittarius, which is ruled by Jupiter. So it seems like there might be an amplification of that energy that might come about during this full moon time period.
So I yes, and I normally Sag can be happy-go-lucky and positive and avuncular, but Sag also has at times some really harsh kinds of harsh judgmental energy. Sagittarius can be very judgmental, and it feels to me like this is coming into play here.
Mm-hmm.
Because the moon is being amplified by Jupiter. It's 2 degrees off, one degree off the galactic center. But what's really got me interested in this configuration are these inconjuncts with the true node and Mercury and Mars. And Mars in Cancer tends to be tidal. It builds up, it builds up, it builds up, and then it explodes. That's the nature of Mars in Cancer, and then it recedes again. Like a lot of Mars in the water signs tend to be like that. With Mars in Scorpio, there tends to be more action, more activity. It generally tends to run that energy more with Mars in Scorpio. Mars in Pisces, the energy can get diverted, get distracted. There's a lot that, but Mars in Cancer, there can be buildup. So what I'm seeing here is this buildup around being expressive and emotive, and to some extent even explosive, as it relates to this Jupiter Moon conjunction and then the inconjunct. I think that's volatility. That's a kind of, I'm mad as hell, I'm not going to take it anymore kind of energy.
Yeah.
And because I think people are getting close to the boiling point, and they're on both sides. The left has kind of been boiled for a while now, and the right has their own boiling point, and it just feels like it's coming up. It's coming to the surface because none of it has been released, right? I mean, we've had 2 years of Russiagate and Mueller, and every single person that went before Mueller and his grand jury, it felt like this is it. This is the nail in the coffin. And it never happened. It never happened. And there was a deification of Mueller during that time on the left. And how do you think those people feel? They feel pissed off, ripped off. There was absolutely zero resolution for them. Like the guy that they hated and have despised since November 9th, 2016, is still in the Oval Office. On the other side, the supporters of that guy are looking at the people who basically put that thing together, and there's nothing happening to those people. And they want to see some form of justice on that end. 2 years worth of investigation, hundreds of millions of tax dollars, the government basically freezing up like an engine without oil, right? And nobody has justice. Nobody. So we're looking at people reaching this kind of boiling point level. I think it's right here.
Well,
I think it's conjuncts.
That was a very well orchestrated sort of ongoing performance almost that did exactly what it was intended to do, which is to divide and conquer and to leave both sides feeling helpless and like they have no say in what the heck is going on. And it was very deliberate and very intentional and very deceptive, right? So we have this energy here.
Oh, absolutely. Incredibly deceptive.
Yeah.
Incredibly deceptive.
So that makes a lot of sense. And so, yeah, I could see something like that coming to a boiling point. And then you have that Jupiter-Mars in conjunction. That's like like you were mentioning before, it's like an overreacting energy when you have Jupiter with Mars. That's like the sign of the overreactor who takes things a little too far over the top. And with that energy in Cancer being involved, that's like over-emotioning all over everything, like emoting all over the place.
Yeah, I know that energy quite well. I've got Mars in Cancer.
Okay.
I know it quite well. And I have an opposite Jupiter in my chart. So
yeah,
I get it. And again, I mean, how does this affect us on a personal level, right? Let's bring it back to the personal.
Yeah. I think this could be a lot of people on a personal level overreacting to things. Obviously, that's like the first thing that kind of jumps out there. People in their own lives, in their own interpersonal relationships, there could be situations that are coming to a head in people's lives with all of this energy here, with the eclipses being triggered, with the north and south nodes being triggered, and with this T-square going on here with Jupiter and Neptune and the sun and moon and this whole configuration. I feel like people might feel like they've been tricked or deceived by people that they care about. They might feel like something is coming to a head. They need to let something go. There's a lot going on all at once here. So I do feel like this is people are going to be very reactionary. Like they're not going to be responding to things that are happening in their lives. They're going to be reacting based on gut instinct and emotion. And I think people might be able to cause a little bit of a mess if they're not careful, because we have Mercury involved. So that's saying something you don't mean because you feel bad in the moment and you want to hurt someone. It's like a vindictive, passive aggressive sort of energy that, I think people should be very careful about what they're saying and the way that they say it, and be very deliberate in your speech if you can, because it's going to be hard, for especially people who have a lot of energy in those degrees in Cancer, like 17 to 20, where that's all being hit. It's going to be hard to keep it under wraps and to not just blurt things out and react. And I think that's where there's going to be problems people are going to come into.
Yeah, at 19 and 20, we're in the third decan. So we're in the Piscean decan.
Yeah.
And that's looking for victims. That's looking for scapegoats. That's looking for people to blame.
And playing the victim, and then blaming others.
Yep. I think, we got a few days, and hopefully this hits YouTube with enough time. I think it's important for people to run some energy. If you've got an issue or you're dealing with frustration or resentment, it's a good time to get it out before this full moon.
Yeah.
So whether you have to talk to somebody, go run out in the woods and scream your head off, do a hardcore cardio workout, whatever, run that energy. So when this energy comes around, you're able to kind of work with it more versus being sort of volatile and reactive with it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay. Well, that is the full moon. Do we have anything else we want to talk about here before we move on to?
Yeah, I just want to mention that this Jupiter moon conjunction in Sagittarius I think we're going to start to see more and more of Generation Z, and they're going to start to come on onto the landscape a bit more. You know, they're the ones that follow the millennials, generally Pluto and Sagittarius.
Oh yeah.
Right. And have you caught Soph by any chance?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so there's this 14-year-old girl. She's Gen Z, and she's amazing. 14 years old. She's got a YouTube video. She's got 990,000 subscribers. YouTube channel. She's been kicked off of YouTube though, because she is, without a doubt, one of the most fearless young people I've seen on the internet. And she's crazy creative. And she does these really politically incorrect streams of consciousness. She's mind-blowing. And apparently there's this kind of young Pluto and Sag subculture that is starting to evolve along these lines. That nothing is sacred to them. Nothing. And they will go after anybody and anything that they think is bullshit. So it's a really interesting phenomenon, and they're turning YouTube on its head in a lot of ways because they're young, and YouTube is looking at, you know, continuing its model with young people, right? I mean, it's they want to continue to have that demographic. Anyway, Gen Z looks like it's starting to upset the apple cart a little bit. And so I just wanted to mention that with this Moon-Jupiter conjunction, because they're starting to come onto the scene now.
Interesting. Well, they're kind of still pretty young, but I guess they're getting a little older. And
well, they're a deeply philosophical generation with Pluto and Sag. A lot of them are really, really wise beyond their years. Check her out, SOPH Soph. She'll blow your mind.
I mean, it makes sense too. Like you're looking at Pluto as sort of like a deconstruction, right? It's like purging and decomposing things. So it's kind of like decomposing what we feel is sacred and all of that.
Every generation, the generation before it, decomposes what they do. It's just
what did we do?
Pluto and Scorpio, you guys are setting the table, okay. Right? You're setting the table, you know, in two ways. Because I see Pluto and Scorpio and the millennials, which really fall into that category, as being kind of extreme versions of Pluto and Scorpio, right? Like there's one version that I think you're probably more a part of, which is self-determinance, which is we're going to figure this thing out on our own. Thank you very much. You might have fucked a few things up, but we're not going to blame anybody for it. We're just going to create something new, right? We're going to regenerate. So, you know, whether it's a piece of land or an old town or whatever. And then the other side of that equation is kind of more like classically snowflake, which is looking outward to transform sort of the culture at large and, you know, burning things down. Like we're going to burn this thing down. And I think that's where Pluto and Scorpio and the millennials are. It's an extreme generation. And I think that they wind up kind of aggregating into these two different areas, okay? What I'm seeing with, like when we talk about government, we talk about corporations, there's been this major trend with commercials that are really kind of pandering to this social identity kind of message. It's like now corporations are into messaging us about what products we should buy, who should buy them, and why we should buy them. It's not just that, you know, this thing does what it's supposed to do, but it's going to make us feel better because here's a father that's teaching their transgender daughter how to use a Gillette razor. Like that's supposed to make some kind of difference, right? And they're actually taking that message and they're broadcasting it to a specific demographic. They're not broadcasting it to me. They're not broadcasting it to the boomers. They're not even broadcasting it to Gen X. They're broadcasting it to this group of social identitarians. Pluto and Sag, they don't care about that. They'll look at that and they'll laugh at that. They'll skewer it. They'll think that it's ridiculous. And so every generation does this, right? It's what happens. And we're supposed to be able to do that because every generation becomes like an enzyme, and it digests the part of the culture that they've inherited that theoretically is wasteful or doesn't need to be around, while keeping the good stuff that generation has brought to the table. That's supposedly how it's supposed to work, right?
That's interesting. Yeah. Well, I can totally see that. I can totally see that with, both those generations. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So there you go.
But we've kind of got a little off track. It's a little astrology lesson there. All right. Well, let's jump into the eclipse season, which is coming up real fast. We have on July 2nd, so in just a few weeks from now, a total solar eclipse that's happening at 10 degrees in the sign of Cancer. And this one is not even though it's the total eclipse, I do think on a personal level, it's going to bring a lot of really interesting sort of transition and transformation and karmic new beginnings and all of these things that, you think about with eclipses on an individual level. But this one doesn't seem as potent as the lunar eclipse that we're going to get into.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And, we're in the second decan with Sun Moon. So that's in the Scorpionic decan. So the transformational qualities that you're talking about, they're right there. They're right in alignment. 28 degrees, Venus, Gemini. I think, to me, that Venus has a lot to do with making up your mind in relationship. That's kind of on the fence. It's really close to anoretic. You're dealing with multiple kinds of options. So if you're sitting on the fence, relationship-wise, this eclipse is really going to bring it up, right? So I would say we're looking at some form of resolution around relationship here. Like if you've got 1 foot in and 1 foot out, this eclipse is going to solve. It'll help you clarify that, like what's important to you emotionally. It'll transform relationships that are either working or not working. Because that Venus, right? It's kind of, what's it doing? It's not really doing a whole lot, right?
It's like unaspected, except for like a really wide.
So relationships stand out during that.
Yeah.
And you sort of the dual nature. You're like, well, okay, well, I like this relationship for this reason, but over here, I'm not crazy about what it brings to me, right? So you're in that kind of Venus Gemini sort of limbo. So if you're in a limbo state in your relationship, this eclipse will fix it.
Absolutely. And I feel like this is going to be sort of an emotional reset for a lot of people too. And that could involve relationship issues because, of course, any new moon in Cancer is kind of an emotional reset and a new beginning in that area. But I feel like this is a chance for people to really break free and get a clean slate from anything that's holding them back. And especially, on that emotional level. And we have that karmic aspect of the North Node being involved because it's an eclipse. And so this could be something that, really resets us and resets our emotions, resets our comfort zones and our sense of safety and security around a certain topic in a way that is very karmic and that can really help lead us into a new direction in our lives that maybe we were meant to move into, but we've been holding back on due to like fear or anxieties or other, difficult past traumas, emotional experiences like we were talking about before. I feel like this is like a big reset for a lot of people. And so it's kind of like this like clearing out and you get this like clear space to grow from where you're not holding on to all of this emotional baggage anymore.
Yeah, I also think it's breaking with patterns too.
Yeah.
You've got Mercury and Mars conjunction in Leo, which wants to be expressive and joyous and fun and playful. Squaring up against Uranus, that's breaking patterns. Mm-hmm. It's breaking away, trying to move away from the intensity of Pluto, right? In these oppositions that are taking place down in the 4th house, even though they're out of sign or out of element. So there's breakaway energy here as well, and that could be good. It could be good. Find your bliss, find your fun, find your joy. And remember what's important to you on an emotional level. What's important? What are your values? Mm-hmm. This is a good time to really affirm those things.
And so it seems like with that too, a lot of people are probably going to be making some really quick changes and quick decisions. So you might see a lot of people like sort of rearranging and really launching into new directions very rapidly and very quickly and sort of unexpectedly, right? Because we have
I would agree with that. Yep, 100%.
so it might kind of be like a whirlwind, like where everyone around you is just like doing this, that, and the other thing, and they're all going off in these different directions, and it's kind of like, what's going on here?
Yeah, and for all you people that somehow watch this and you live in South America, this is where this eclipse is going to show up. And it's mostly in the southern part of South America. And both of these eclipses, both the solar and the lunar, are going to be highlighting South America. And I think South America is going to become really important over the course of the next 15 to 20 years. You know, South America is where the light is going to shine, I think, literally and figuratively. And I think we're going to get a sense of that with this eclipse energy. I would not be surprised if we get more talk about like migration, but migration going north to south instead of south to north. That would be coming up as part of this discussion, you know, after these eclipses occur.
Yeah, I have kind of had a sense of that, not just really because of the astrology, but in general, that's something that in my lifetime that, you know, we will see. So like people migrating south of the border instead of having to worry about, you know, immigrants are coming into America. I actually fully believe that if they were to make a wall, the wall is to keep us in, because they see it coming and they know that there is going to be a mass exodus at some point. And I do think that there is going to be a migration further south.
Well, I mean, the challenge with that, at least it has been inequity, right? Like you can't own property in Mexico. You know, you could have a lease on it, but the government basically owns everything if you're a non-citizen.
Mm-hmm.
So I think part of the immigration issues stem from levels of inequity to a large extent. Those theoretically can be solved, but it's going to be interesting. Just keep your eye on South America. I feel like this eclipse is going to have some energy, some insight, some information as to where things are headed.
Interesting. Okay, so everybody watch out for what's going on in South America and watch out for the changes that are coming up. You know, there's a lot of frustrated energy that I feel like is about to be released on this eclipse. So you might see people making some really just quick changes, and even if it's not you, it's probably going to be going on around you. And so it can be, I think it's going to be a little bit of a whirlwind. And then, so this is the energy for the full moon eclipse. And this is, I mean, there's a lot going on here. This is the one that I think is going to be kind of interesting. This is happening at 24 degrees in the sign of Capricorn, and the moon as part of this eclipse, and this is, what kind of eclipse is this? A partial lunar eclipse. And so this is not going to be a full blood moon or anything like that, but the way that it's lining up with Saturn and Pluto in the south node, and then on the opposite end, we have Venus in a really tight conjunction with the north node as part of this configuration. We have Mercury in retrograde now. It's just a very intense energy. So I'm interested to see what you make of this.
Well, I think the two eclipses are linked because the solar eclipse takes place on July 2nd.
Yeah.
Which is 2 days before, of course, 4th of July.
Mm-hmm.
And on that eclipse, Sirius is actually rising before the eclipse, and Sirius plays a pretty significant role in agronomy, mythology,
mm-hmm.
Fascinating stuff, right? With Sirius. Anyway, so it's a Sirius being binary star of the sun, right? I mean, there's been a lot of research. Wow, we've got this interesting relationship with, Sirius A, and of course the cluster of Sirius around it. And when you look at it from that perspective, that makes our solar system really big, right? It goes all the way out to the Sirius constellation, or the Sirius set of stars. And at that time, Sirius is going to be rising on that eclipse. So there's a lot of mythology and lore around Sirius, especially with the founding of the country. We're going to get into some of this with this lunar eclipse. The two are linked together. Mm-hmm. I really feel like this energy, what I'm looking at here, it feels very Civil War-like. I'm calling it.
It's right very divisive, yeah.
It's very Civil War-like. And while we may not be in the streets fighting a civil war, that's what the energy feels like. Mm-hmm. It's like one side against the other. And it's really polarized, deeply polarized. That's how I see it.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's a very polarized energy. It's like a crazy opposition going on, and it's very intense. And I think it's kind of, so the thing that obviously sticks out in a way that's very obvious is this energy of like the Capricornian side versus the Cancerian side. The Cancerian side, like we mentioned before, is more grassroots. It's more like common person, right? And then we have this energy of like the corporations and the corporatocracy and fascism and all this kind of stuff that's kind of on the other end of the spectrum there. And it seems like it's almost like everything is coming to a head with the full moon, because the full moon is the culmination of something. So it's like the culmination of something that's been going on with this overarching, really oppressive, authoritarian energy within the government and the corporations and even, you know, religious hierarchies and things like that. I would say the Catholic Church, among other religious groups, is a Capricornian institution. And so it's kind of like coming to a head. And there is definitely some divisiveness going on there. That's already a thing. So it'd be interesting to see how this, you know, plays out.
Yeah, that Pluto Moon conjunction is you know, we use the word intense a lot. You know, I wish I could come up with another word for that Pluto Moon conjunction. Judgmental, like judgment. There's judgment with that moon, and that's a harsh conjunction, because the Capricorn moon is by and large a pretty dry and austere moon. You know, it's not a moon that's given to, you know, warm and fuzzy feelings. And yeah, maybe you have Capricorn moon in your chart. It's not a death sentence, you know, but you're learning about things like emotional responsibility and, you know, learning how to take care of yourself in a different kind of way. You know, if you do have a Capricorn moon, hey, don't worry about it. It'll get better as you get older. But you know, this moon in conjunction with Pluto, man, it's just like, it's like, wow, judgmental. Judgmental is the word that comes to mind. And Cancer is so subjective in dealing with that kind of judgmental energy, like finality. There's like a finality, an energy of finality here. Yeah, it's very intense, very powerful, and triggering. The word I get is triggering. You know, this is a triggering aspect. You know, it's really funny. We talk about grassroots, and you know, there are people who, like, you know, live in, like that guy who I talked about lives in North Carolina. That's a grassroots kind of person. And there are other versions of grassroots which are very, very different than that in some ways. You know, so I don't want people to just think that we're just looking at this from, you know, one kind of, you know, homogenized perspective, you know, because there are other versions, there are other realities or other manifestations of what that looks like. You know, Cancer can be really tribal. You can be really connected to things like herbalism and tinctures and people working, you know, in sort of, you know, more shamanic ways with some of those materials. So, you know, there's a bigger definition here, but I think ultimately it gets into, you know, kind of this, when I look at this aspect, I think of the movie Avatar. That's what it brings to mind, right? Because on the one side, you've got this Cancerian kind of population, which is more tribal, more organic, more kind of land-based. And then you've got on the other side, sort of, you know, the summons from the, you know, from the top of the mountain, or you know, from the top of the, you know, from the top of the skyscraper. It's a very powerful energy. And I think people should begin to wrap their heads around some kind of conflict that's going to become very evident during this time.
And what's interesting too, as you're talking about the grassroots movement, because I'm like looking at Pluto, and Pluto, you know, works in extremes, right? It's like very black and white. It's very extreme. And there's more than one type of grassroots movement. Not all grassroots movements are positive and beneficial. So kind of like along the lines of what you were saying. So, and there are like very extreme, very dark sorts of grassroots movements that do bubble up from time to time, organically and sometimes inorganically. And so this kind of, it makes me think of like the word extremist, right? I don't like using that word because I feel like it's overused, and it's like used to just categorize, you know, blanket statement about a whole bunch of things. But it seems like that this could bring some sort of extremist, you know, energy up to the surface almost.
Well, it could. I mean, look, we're in a time right now where there are high level groups with agendas.
Yeah.
Right? Whether they're technocrats, whether they're plutocrats, whether they're illuminated families with their tentacles and these various kinds of corporate manifestations, whether they're countries with ideas of domination and control. We're in a period of time where we're looking at a land grab, and the land grab is ideological, it's philosophical, and all that stuff gets turned into law, right? Like I was having a conversation with a guy who lives in Boulder, and he told me that Google's moving into Boulder, and Google just went in and bought a shitload of real estate in Boulder. They just started buying houses, right? And the houses that they've bought, some of their people will live there, but the ones that don't live there, Google's selling them and they're selling them for a profit. So Google is going and creating company towns. And not only are they creating company towns, so they're driving the price of real estate. It's really an interesting phenomenon in changing the face of Boulder. So this is just one example of these kinds of entities which are going in and changing how we live, that they've got skin in the game, right? So in order for these entities to continue to grow and have more control, they've got to have situations that allow them to take advantage of this ideological bridge or gap or divide. So what does that mean? It means that, shit happens and we have these events. And if Google or YouTube or any of these other entities like Facebook want to continue to ratchet down free speech or ratchet down people's rights or deplatform, what do they need? Well, they need a couple of events that look very extremist on the surface.
Yeah.
And then they will jump right in and say, see. And look, we've been dealing in an environment where a number of these events, when you really drill down, look pretty dubious. And then right after these events, something happens. Like there's something like legislation's about to take place.
Yep.
And this is nothing new, right? It's nothing new. You go back to the Tea Party. That's what the Tea Party was. These guys had a false flag. They were running around dressed up like Indians, right? Dumping the tea. And then what happens? Oh, problem, reaction, solution. Let's have a revolution, right? It's been happening for a long time. We've got to be careful here because we're on the precipice of Google and YouTube and Facebook and these technocrats moving all in, putting the chips in place, and all they need are one or two events, and the door slams shut. And I think that's kind of what we're looking at here.
That makes a lot of sense, and I could totally see that being like a sort of like an extremist sort of energy, but it's like masquerading as that. It's masquerading as something grassroots, right? Because this is about corporate vying for control and that type of thing with like the
vying for control. Absolutely. Because once entities are in power, they don't want to give that up.
No.
They're not going to sit down and negotiate, say, yeah, you're right. We should be a bit more fair. No, they're not going to do that.
And I mean, it makes sense with the energy right now. I talked with my friend Ksenia on another video, and we talked about the energy of this like Pluto-Saturn conjunction and how the last time that this came about was during the Protestant Reformation and with Martin Luther. And so the only reason that was able to take place and take hold and so many people became involved and it actually led to some sort of change, although it was like, pretty bloody circumstances around it, was because of the invention of the printing press, which actually occurred prior to Martin Luther. But Martin Luther's 95 Theses was one of the first popularized like social thing that was like printed and distributed, like widespread distribution. It was the first form of mass media, really. And it was because it was so compelling and he was saying what a lot of people were thinking. And so now we have the internet. That was, it came into our awareness only the past, couple decades or so. And now people are utilizing it to disseminate information that undermines the authority of the corporatocracy and the government and the medical establishment. And all of these different things, it's the exact same thing. The Catholic Church was the big, overarching authority back then, and now we have Google, right? We have these corporations.
The Church of Google, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think that there could be some kind of more humanitarian way to describe this eclipse, but it's just rife with opposition.
Yeah.
And that Pluto Moon conjunction is, even though it's in a cardinal sign, you're dealing with fixed energies and fixed beliefs and fixed attitudes, and it's almost like the stern parent that's already decided how things are going to go, and it doesn't really matter if you can make a case for your, I don't know, innocence or no. It's almost like this is baked. It's baked. Like this is just how things are going to go. This is the way it is. You better get used to it. There are some trines coming off which are interesting. You've got the trine from Mars to Jupiter, and then we have that trine from the Sun to Neptune, and those are interesting trines. That Mars-Jupiter trine, that's energy, and that's action, and that's going to be interesting to watch during this time, because even though there's polarization, I don't think there's lack of mobilization. Not with the Mars-Jupiter trine. People are fired up.
Yeah.
Definitely fired up.
Absolutely. And I think that compassionate energy of Neptune that we keep talking about, I mean, I think that's going to be somewhat helpful in alleviating some of this energy. I think there's a way to escape from dealing with the craziness that's going on around us, with that Neptunian energy, but to escape in an appropriate way where we're not completely ignoring it.
Yeah, I don't think compassion and empathy really sells on the internet.
Yeah.
Like Twitter is devoid of compassion and empathy. Twitter is I think Twitter is a brutal and mean medium.
Yeah.
That's my experience. YouTube tends to be a little bit better, but by and large, what people are looking for on the internet are clicks, and clicks are usually volatile, or they're virtue signaled. And virtue signaling is different from real compassion and real empathy. It's different.
Well, and then the less personal the platform is, the more you're going to get like that, Twitter experience where it's very just cruel and like unnecessary, and there's like a lot of fighting and arguing and things like that, where the drama sells. And the more personal it gets, so like YouTube's more personal, right? We're talking to people. You can see us. We're like, there's a face to the name. You're not just behind like typing all menacingly like
Right.
behind your keyboard. So I think there are different variations of that. But yeah, by and large it is. And even on YouTube, people can sit there and comment mean things and start fights with people in the comment sections of videos and things like that. So it is a place where people can go to be kind of assholes.
Yeah, I don't always think cooler heads prevail on the internet.
Yeah.
I really don't. I don't think taking the high road on the internet is really respected or
it's not.
has a lot of resonance, right? Like if you're going to have compassion and empathy, save it for people you really care about.
Yeah.
And I think with the Sun trine to Neptune, there is some of that available, and channel it in areas that are meaningful. Don't just no pearls before swine. That's what I think.
Well, there you go. Well, is there anything else you want to talk about with these eclipses before we sign off? This is kind of a lengthy video, but we're covering more space, which I think is probably a good thing with all the craziness coming up, to like do this now.
I just think we're getting ready to get into this tunnel.
Yeah.
We're getting ready to get into this portal, and it's going to start to cook around this first eclipse. And it's going to, the zenith is that mega eclipse in December on the 26th. That's going to be huge. And that takes us into that Saturn-Pluto conjunction
Mm-hmm.
in January, February of 2020. And I really feel like we're kind of living on the fumes of the 20th century right now. In that you and I, if we're having these discussions a year from now, I think they're going to be different. We're going to be talking about different things, different priorities,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe even different platforms. So, I would say, enjoy these times while you can, and not get too hung up on the doom and gloom of what might or will happen.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that we're really entering the portal and the gateway for a very different kind of social order that really starts to begin in December, moving into 2020. And 2020 is going to be off the hook. It's going to be nuts.
Yeah, that's going to be a completely different situation. And definitely, I agree with you. And, everybody out there, just don't worry so much about what's going on out there. Take care of yourself, self-care, right? Take care of your immediate environment. Worry about that first, because there's going to be, I think, a lot of turbulence, and it's really easy to get caught up in the divisive rhetoric and the fighting and arguing and politicizing of everything. And I think that that's probably going to be like amped up on steroids over the next few weeks. So, keep yourself grounded and connected with what's actually real in your life. Like, is that affecting you? Like, realistically right now, is that affecting you? If it's not, don't worry about it. Worry about what is affecting you, and worry about the people that you care about, and channel that compassionate Neptunian energy into that, like you were saying before.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And I think that's really well said.
Thanks. All right. Well, I feel like we gave a lot of information, so I think we're about ready to sign off here. So yeah, if you're watching this on my channel and you want to book a reading with Robert, I always post his links down in the description below. For me, the same thing. And I hope you all have a really great eclipse season, and I hope it does bring positive manifestations and progress, and helps you to break free from things that you don't want anymore. And helps you to connect with people on a more grassroots level, because I think that's what it's about too. All right. Well, thank you so much, Robert.
Thanks for having me, Heather. We'll see you again.
All right. Bye.